Happy Interdependence Day.
Happy Interdependence Day.
Indeed, we are not independent of each other, and we are not dependent on anything. As the Diamond Sutra tells us, if the mind depends upon anything, it has no sure haven. And so we are cultivating the mind that alights upon nothing whatsoever. Experiencing this interdependent, interrelated circle of the way. This circle, or sometimes we say mandala, is a wonderful thing. Of course, we get caught up in linear time, the longitudes and latitudes of space, and we forget that we are all in the embrace of the cosmos. Is anyone left out? No. Here we are, each in our unique ways, yet practicing together, always in mutuality. The seemingly separated individualities, I love that, individualities, fundamentally indivisible. So maybe it's no surprise that at this time in my life, the circle means so much. Birth, death. That first breath, wah! And as a result, beyond any doubt, that last breath will come. The circle of life, the fulfillment. For some, it comes early on and sudden. My brother was 20 when he was riding his bicycle and was hit by a car. My father was 26, killed in battle in Germany, a couple months before the end of the war. But for others, like this old lady, it's a gradual disintegration. First one thing, then another. I hear from Larry Shaneberg, who's a few years older than I am, and every time he calls me, he's got some new complaint. He says, "Oh, old age is the most powerful koan. And then this happened, and then this happened, and now I have this." He's solving it. We know the time to shed this form, whether vigorous and young or crumbling away, will come. As Edo Roshi said in his last Teisho, it's Buddha's great gift that we don't know when we will die. So, each moment is lived in its fullness with gratitude. Thanks for everything. Complaints and arguments, they just fall away. One of my favorite passages from the Dhammapada, for hatred can never put an end to hatred. Love alone can. This is an unalterable law. People forget that their lives will end soon. For those who remember, quarrels come to an end. And I want to repeat one phrase. Love alone can. I've noticed that some people think that love is not allowed in Zen practice. Remember a story, someone asked the Buddha, is part of your teaching love and compassion? What did he say? No. All of my teaching is love and compassion. If only this is held as the truth for each one of us, then no more worries about your not being perfect, as Sozan Senji said. You know, when Shinge Roshi and I look at you, we see your perfection. And you come into Doksan, on the great road of Buddha ancestors, there is always unsurpassable practice, continuous, sustained. between aspiration, what brings you to this practice. The practice itself, sit down. Let everything go. Just breathe. Enlightenment and nirvana. There is not a moment's gap, Dogen says. But somehow we fictionalize our lives and the gaps seem to be very real. So we just return again and again. So this circle of life, this first breath, and then moving through all the passages that we are allowed this time around. And then that last breath. The circle completes itself. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. And what a gift it is to be with a loved one at that last breath. As Rogen and his father Reijitsu were with your grandmother just before session, May 21st, June, what month are we in? Yes, June 21st, Mandala Day. And as Myogen and Brinna were with their father, Saigyo, Yuho, Terence Keenan, May 25th. I came upon an entry in my journal for Dai Bosatsu Zendo's 1996 anniversary session. Saigyo arrived with the signed contract to purchase 266, our new home. Now a new era begins for Hoenji. He was by my side for so many, many Dharma events. And he and Jikai, Myogen's mother, Andy, Jesse, you, and Brinna were together many times. Good food. I remember my mother's last breath. My sister and I were on either side of her bed in the palliative care room, and I was so struck that we were giving death to the one who had given us life. And then where are they now? Some of you may remember the story I told about Andy, my husband, when he was working in the psychiatric emergency room quite a few years ago. It was a slow night. One of the doctors came in, sat down, and he said, "So, I hear you're a Buddhist." Uh-oh. "Do you believe in reincarnation?" And he said, "Do you believe in breathing?" The doctor said, "No, I just breathe." Right. Round again. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. This reminds me of another story. I'm afraid my talk is full of stories. I'm hoping that you will just take a chance to change your posture. As needed. A story, some of you may have heard of it. It's about another Zen pioneer to America on the West Coast, Shinge Roshi. San Francisco Zen Center, Green Gulch, Tassajara. He was on his deathbed, and one of his disciples asked, "When will we meet again?" Suzuki Roshi, Gasho. And then later, someone asked, "What did he mean?" And our friend Kaz Tanahashi said, "Maybe he meant, see you around." Where will we meet? See you around. In the introduction to Endless Vow, Eido Roshi spoke of the Dai Bosatsu mandala, the spiritual interrelationships, the uncanny correspondences that go beyond the limits of logical thinking. As Shinge Roshi quoted, I hear his voice, so I'm going to say it the way he did. The real is not rational. The rational is not real. Some of you remember? But, he said, from an ordinary perspective, events appear to be random. Life appears to be chaos. But from the perspective of a mandala, things are as they are. Everything is perfect as it is. There is no coincidence. Things, people, and events might appear chaotic, but we often sense an uncanny appropriateness. There is an underlying pattern, one to which we unwittingly refer when we say, "That's the way it goes." In this mandala, the esoteric and exoteric merge. There is no boundary between East and West. Life and death are not two separate and distinct matters. Thus, although Shinge Roshi passed away in 1984, he is vividly alive. And although Edo Roshi passed away in 2018, here he is. So, circles. In ancient China, many masters would use circle, depicting it in space, drawing it on the earth. This feeling of wholeness, of encompassing all without any individuation. And in Japan, many masters show this through the enso. Starting out with the brush filled with ink, plunging into the paper. The breath moving the brush up, around, down, almost meeting, touching, and then. So I brought this little enso done by Noritake Roshi. Some of you met him when he was here several times, in New York City as well. And the scroll in the meeting room is by him. And it means Dharma, light, miraculously shines. This is each of you. You are sitting here miraculously shining, no matter what. Pain, mind wandering, sleepiness, it doesn't matter. And when you go to see that scroll, you can also see the beautiful natural wooden circle surrounded by mosses and little flowers that Rudin made for us on the table there. So here we are, celebrating International Dai Bosatsu Zendo Kongoji, Dai Bosatsu Diamond Temple, 48th anniversary. But circling back, how old is it really? We can say, well, in 2 years, it'll be 50. And we'll have another session. And most of us were at the 40th, a great gathering after sitting. But when did it begin? We can say July 4th, 1976. But every step on this circle of the way led to that moment, to this moment. Someone said, I have no idea how I got here, what brought me. Somehow I felt called, and here I am. And I have no idea when I'll leave. Yay. And that reminds me of Shinge Roshi asking Soen Roshi, why did you become a monk? And Soen Roshi said, I so badly wanted to become a monk. And Shinge Roshi said, but why? I just had to become a monk. We make things so complicated, don't we? It's just so simple. So, the circular movement, not steps along a straight path or even a zigzag path, but the brushstroke that brought us to this anniversary session. Go back a long way. Each strand of the brush, each filament coated with ink, and what can we say about it? As to the revolving wheel of Dharma, no thought is wasted over it. And Dogen said, the path of all Buddhas and ancestors arises before the first forms emerge. When did this path begin? And he said, it cannot be spoken of in conventional views. Yet, certain momentous happenings we can point to all the various bodhisattvas in their various realms on the cosmic map. On May 21st, May 21st, Mandala Day, 1984. How long ago? Some of you still have that ability, eh? So 40 years ago. Tomorrow we will go outside for that part of our Dai Bosatsu anniversary celebration. And Shinge Roshi wrote a letter to the Sangha on May 21st saying, inviting us to come here to bury the ashes of Soen Roshi and Yogen Senzaki. He wrote, when Soen Roshi was visiting Dai Bosatsu Zendo in the summer of 1982, his last visit here, one day he and I, together with Mr. Yoshida, a Japanese stonecutter, took a walk in Sangha Meadow. At one point we stopped and looked at Beecher Lake and the monastery beyond. Soen Roshi said, this is a good place for eternal rest. I said, Shinge Roshi, in fact, I have been thinking of this very spot to bury part of your ashes if by chance you die before me. Suddenly he took my right hand, knelt on the ground, held my hand tightly, and said, thank you. That very day, he wrote Namu Dai Bosa, Chinese characters, and asked me to write it in English letters. And Mr. Yoshida carved it in stone. On March 11th of this year, 1984, suddenly Soen Roshi passed away. Yogen Senzaki passed away in 1958. Half of his ashes were buried in Los Angeles. The other half went to Japan, and Soen Roshi brought them to New York in 1968. These ashes have been enshrined on the altar in the Dharma Hall here ever since its founding. These two pioneer teachers' ashes will be buried side by side on the 4th of July, 1984. And it includes a drawing, first of what they saw from that spot of the monastery and the lake. And then on the other side, it shows the stupa itself. Namo Dai Bosa. At first they thought Nyogen Senzaki would have this side and Soen Roshi this side. So that's what this diagram shows. But as you know, they are now reversed. And as of 2018, the tablet for Soen Roshi includes Edo Roshi. The letter has an important paragraph that I want to share with you, because it is in its own way very much like what Dogen Zenji wrote. Needless to say, without Soen Shaku's visits to America, D.T. Suzuki's enormous effort, Nyogen Senzaki's half-century-long struggle, Soen Roshi's wisdom, Yasutani Roshi's tireless teaching, and our anonymous donors' great generosity, Dai Bosatsu Zendo would never have been born. But these distinguished people could not by themselves have made this birth possible. The greatest significance of International Dai Bosatsu Zendo Kongoji is that it has been established through the combined effort and ceaseless concern of all known and unknown teachers and students, brothers and sisters. And this is none other than continuous practice is the circle of the way. The power of this continuous practice confirms you as well as others. Do you understand? Confirms you. What does that mean?
Like confirmation.
Make it real.
Sentient beings are fundamentally Buddhas. It means your practice affects the entire earth and the entire sky in the 10 directions. So don't doubt, even for a moment, what we are doing here. Another moment is happening. 10 years later, on July 4th, 1994, exactly
30.
Edo Roshi dedicated the Kaisando, the Founders Hall, where we hold Dokusan and chant for all of these great teachers. And he tells why the Founders Hall includes the people it does, why he says, I have decided to follow the example of my favorite Zen master, Torei Enji Zenji, who was the first abbot of Ryutakaji, where I was trained before I came to the United States. Master Torei was a student of Hakuin Zenji. So here's another little story. At the time Ryutakaji was established, some 250 years ago, this is 94, Master Hakuin was living at Shoinji, about 50 miles south of Ryutakaji. Master Torei, by karmic coincidence, was informed by an unknown village farmer that there was a beautiful and spiritually dynamic spot for a temple in the mountains at Sawaji, just outside Mishima City. Torei went to see it and was struck by its power and serenity. He was determined to establish a temple there. First, he invited Kanzeon Bodhisattva to dwell there. He began chanting in Meijuku Konongyo many, many times without having any set number in mind, just chanting Kanze, Kanze. Meanwhile, there was a man in Gifu Prefecture who, for one reason or another, had decided to chant Enmeijuku Kanongyo 1 million times. Not knowing of each other's chanting practice and living about 500 miles away from each other, these two individuals were chanting intensively Enmeijuku Kanongyo. A couple of years later, the man in Gifu Prefecture had a dream. In this dream, he saw Torei chanting. After he went to Torei and offered total financial support to establish a Buddhist monastery there. When everything was underway in the construction, Torei went to see his teacher, Hakuin, and informed him about what was going on. He asked Hakuin to come and visit, which he did. This is almost exactly what I, Dai Roshi, did when I came to New York. After the completion of Ryutakaji Monastery, Torei asked Hakuin to be the Kanjo Kaisan, which means the respectfully invited founder. Now Torei is regarded as Sunken Kaisan, which means the originating founder. When I was a young monk practicing at Ryutakaji, I heard this story and it impressed me very much. I even thought that if in the future such an opportunity would be possible in my life, I would do the same thing. At that time, of course, I had no idea I would come to America. I did not know anything about Nyogen Senzaki, Jimmy Tanahashi, or his mother, Shubin-san. But when I look back, I cannot help but be aware of all these threads that eventually were woven into this Dharma net we call Dai Bosatsu Zendo Kongoji. The letter is actually quite long, so I will stop there. So let's go back a few decades and ask, as all good Zen students do, why did Bodhidharma come from the West? In our case, why did Soen Shaku come from the East? Even before his trip to speak at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893, the first Zen student in America, named Ida Russell, and several devotees had been sitting, holding a strong meditation practice in a communal setting in San Francisco. She did not attend the World Parliament of Religions, but in 1902, she and Elsie Drexler and a nephew traveled to Japan, determined to undertake formal Zen practice. I have a correspondence with someone in Japan named Wayne Yamakawa, and he sent me the manuscript, The House of Silent Light, The Dawning of Zen in Gilded Age America, by the late Brian Riggs and Hidemi Riggs. And that was quite some time ago, but it was finally published this spring. And he also shared with me a manuscript by Soen Shaku Roshi about their visit. He wrote, this is Soen Shaku's words, "Soon after disembarking at Yokohama, she, Ida Russell, asked their guide whether he knew of someone who was doing sitting meditation in Japan." Imagine that. As it turns out, their guide was a person who had been to my temple before and had heard my talks. He told them, there's a place nearby in Kamakura where they have a program open to both monks and lay persons alike. "Then you must take us there directly," replied Mrs. Russell. It was in this way that their guide brought them to me. Westerners who come to Japan are usually in a hurry to see Nikko or Hakone, but this group was different. For they came to my temple directly, indicating how earnest they were. "Give us permission to practice alongside the other monks." Needless to say, our languages, customs, and habits, our mental outlooks, and sense of etiquette were different. In short, to all appearances, everything was different from one end of the spectrum to the other. To be a Zen monk, you have to dig potatoes, sweep and scrub floors, cut firewood, even haul manure at times. Just seeing the chores awaiting them and thinking it beneath them to perform, they might reach the wrong conclusion that the Zen life had nothing to offer them. So thinking, I strongly expressed my refusal. But the more I refused, the more they implored me for permission, until I had no choice but to grant their wish. The reason I did so, Soen Shaku writes, is because from the time I was a child, I remember being taught the Buddha's words, "The triple world is where we are. All living beings therein are our children." The triple world is this world of ours, our domain. All the people who fill this world, all its plants and animals, all these living beings are our children. This teaching was constantly impressed upon me. And so, the Russell contingent remained in Japan, practicing alongside the monks, doing whatever they did for nearly 9 months, until March 1903. And just before their departure, the monks held a farewell party. And Ida said to her teacher, "This has been a most wonderful experience for us. It is a shame that we cannot share it with others. So someday, when your circumstances allow, you must come visit our country." And they did in 1905. Most of you know this story, this history. Soen Shaku Roshi came with his young disciple, the brilliant D.T. Suzuki, and they stayed with the Russells. And also a young monk named Nyogen Senzaki, who had some health problems with his eye and had to come separately later, taking a freighter to Seattle, but eventually ended up there at the Russells' home. But somehow, this rural guy with drippy eye was not fully appreciated, and he was sent off. And ended up, of course, spending many, many, many years with only one visit back to Japan, and sitting, just expressing the essence of practice. And Soen Shaku Roshi and D.T. Suzuki traveled, and eventually Sermons of a Buddhist Abbot was published by Paul Karras. Now it's been given a more saleable title. What's it called? Zen for Americans. So the story goes on, and I won't go into it, but eventually, Soen Nakagawa Roshi became abbot of Utagaji and had a promising young disciple named Edo Taishimano, who came to America, first Hawaii, then New York City, established New York Zendo, visited this mountain, and knew at once, this is the place. And creating a Zendo in the Beecher house, which has had its origin as James Beecher's fishing camp and eventually was built out a bit. And James's sister was who? So you know the story. And the monastery was built thanks to, as Edo Roshi put it, all these donors and all these truly dedicated practitioners like you. These interwoven lives, past, present, and future. This mountain, formed of ancient rocks and the remains of countless beings, the indigenous people who lived here thousands of years, the wildlife, the plants, always new seeds falling upon the round, receptive earth and growing and taking their new forms. And Dogen, on this great road of Buddha ancestors, there is always unsurpassable practice, continuous and sustained, no gap. This now actualizing. We chant, this Dharma, incomparably profound and minutely subtle, is rarely met with, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of eons. We now can see this. Listen to this. Accept and hold this. May we completely realize and actualize the Tathagata's teachings. Completely. As Kushu said in his talk, we are recently back from Japan. He and Genryu-san, his partner, and I, to attend the Shinzan-shiki, the installation of Yamakawa Sogen Roshi as the supreme habit of Myo-shinji. Is now called Yamakawa Geika. And many of you practiced with him on his many, many visits to DBZ, to lead session with Edo Roshi, and in 2018, to officiate at Edo Roshi's funeral. And Genryu has continued to go to Shogenji for rohatsu. So there were about 1,000 of us in the Buddha Hall. Many, many more townspeople outside. And as Yamakawa Geika sat on the high seat, 5 Myoshinji abbots, representing the different branches of Myoshinji, including Noritake Shunan Roshi, who, as I said, has been here several times. The 5 of them came forward, bowed, and stood silently in front of him, each holding in his hands an invisible disc, a sacred circle, tilted this way like we hold our jihatsu. Right? We hold our jihatsu tilted forward so that the top, beautiful cloth, is facing each being. This gesture, as if to say, we honor your clear mirror mind and invite you to take on this great task. Well, it was incredible. And seeing those 5 abbots holding those circles that brought to my mind the great 9th century Chinese master Kyozan Ejak, who, with his teacher Isan Ryu, founded the oldest school of the Zen 5 schools. With their one mind, their absolute utter intimacy of seeing into this matter, creating the Igyo school, Isan, Kyozan. Based on the hidden teachings that came down from none other than the 6th ancestor, Weinong, Eno in Japanese, using various sacred symbols, but particularly 97 circles as teaching devices to point to the nature of this. At Hoenji in Syracuse, we just finished, after several years, I don't know how many years, the pandemic came in there somewhere, many, many years, we were delving into the Platform Sutra of the 6th ancestor. And it would be hard to imagine anything left unsaid. I will just give you just a little tiny taste. The sixth patriarch said, if people in future ages want to find a Buddha, all they need to do is to understand what a sentient being is. And they will be able to understand what a Buddha is. Buddhas are due to sentient beings. Apart from a sentient being, there is no Buddha mind. And he also said, the master told his disciples, be well, I am leaving you now. After I'm gone, don't engage in the worldly customs of crying and accepting condolences and wearing mourning garments. That would not be the Buddhist way, and you would not be my disciples. Act the same as when I was here. Sit together in meditation, but remain free of movement and stillness, birth and death, coming and going, right and wrong, present and past. Be at ease and at peace. Be at ease and at peace. Yet there was this sacred, secret text. Very much like the Kabbalah in Judaism. Only those of a certain spiritual maturity could receive it. So Eno gave this text to Nanyo Eichu, the national teacher, who passed it on to Tangen Oshin, his Inji. You may remember the story of the emperor asking Chu, when he was very old, asking Nanyo Eichu, how can I best honor you when you pass from this life, when you become 100 years? It's the Blue Cliff Record, case 18. I strongly recommend it if you don't know it. Chu said, make me a seamless pagoda. And then he just sat. And then he asked the emperor, do you understand? No. Well then, ask my Inji, Tangen Oshin. And later, Nanyo Eichu told Tangen, 30 years after I have died, now you see, we're in this realm, right? This realm. Do you feel it? 30 years after I have died, a novice monk will come from the south who will greatly revive this teaching. When the time comes, pass the teaching on to him. And don't let it end. And 30 years later, sure enough, along came Kyozan. And Tongan was impressed with him. And after some time, he gave him the secret text. Don't worry, we're almost out of time. I can't speak very much more, so that's a good thing. But let me just finish this. He gave him the text, and a while later, he said, you know, the symbols and texts that I gave you are extremely rare, esoteric, and precious. Do you have them in a good spot in the archives? Well, Kyozan said, well, after I examined them, I burned them. Tongan said, what? This Dharma gate of ours can't be understood by most people. Again, like Kabbalah. How could you burn the text? Kyozan said, after examining it, I fully comprehended the meaning. Then there was no use keeping the text. And this is true. This is really true. When you have insight into your own secret circle, there is nothing to retain, nothing to pass on, no crud to put on a shelf. However, Kyozan continued, if you would like another copy, no problem, I'll make one. And then he sat down and wrote page after page, circle after circle, completing the entire book from memory. Where is it now? Huh? Of course, all of these great Chinese masters' circle drawings in various koans, Japanese masters, and so all these ceremonial gestures. When you feel this, try it. Just right here. We are naturally offering our body, mind, harmony in this circle of the way.